During a late-night road trip across the desolate highways of Nevada, my friends and I found ourselves in one of those stretches of road where it feels like you're the only car for miles. The stars were bright, but the isolation and emptiness made the night feel eerily quiet. We had been driving for hours, tired, but determined to make it to our next stop before crashing for the night. Suddenly, out of nowhere, we saw her, standing on the side of the road, illuminated only by our headlights. She was waving us down, a lone figure in the middle of the Nevada desert. What was weird, besides the fact that anyone would be standing out there in the middle of the night, was her clothing. She was wearing this long, old-fashioned dress, something you'd expect to see in a photo from decades ago, not in the middle of a modern highway. At first, none of us said a word. It was one of those moments where everyone is thinking the same thing. Should we stop? It's late, we're tired, and there's no telling how long she's been standing out there. It felt wrong to just drive by, but something about it didn't sit right either. But then, without even fully discussing it, we pulled over. She approached the car slowly, her face mostly hidden in the shadow of her bonnet, which only added to the sense of unease. I rolled down the window and asked if she needed help. Her voice was quiet, almost too soft to hear over the car engine, but she said something about needing a ride to the next rest stop. We debated in hushed voices for a second, but then we let her in. She climbed into the back seat without saying much, barely even making eye contact. Her presence felt off. The ride continued in silence, except for the occasional murmur from her as she directed us toward a rest stop. She gave minimal responses, nothing that would explain what she was doing out there alone or why she was dressed like she had stepped out of a different century. As we drove, I couldn't shake this strange, uneasy feeling. She didn't move much, just sat there, staring out the window as if lost in another world. I caught her reflection in the rearview mirror a few times, and each time it gave me chills. There was something ghostly about her, like she didn't fully belong in our car, or in our time. Finally, she asked us to stop, pointing ahead to a dimly lit rest stop that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Relieved that the uncomfortable ride was over, we pulled in. But when we turned around to tell her we had arrived, she was gone. The back seat was completely empty. We all sat there in stunned silence for a moment, unsure if we had imagined it or if she had somehow slipped out without us noticing. But that didn't make sense. There was no way she could have exited the car without one of us hearing or seeing her. As we sat there, processing what had just happened, my friend noticed something on the seat where she had been sitting. It was an old, faded newspaper, crinkled and yellowed with age. The headline caught my eye immediately. Local woman missing in mysterious disappearance. The date on the newspaper? From 30 years ago. But the most chilling part? The woman in the photograph looked exactly like the one we had just picked up. We bolted out of the car, scanning the rest stop for any sign of her, but it was deserted. No other cars, no other people. Just us and the memory of that woman, who had vanished just as mysteriously as she had appeared. The rest of the drive was in complete silence. No one dared to speak about what had just happened. To this day, I still can't explain it, but I'll never forget the way that woman's face looked, trapped in time, lost on those desolate Nevada highways. On a road trip through the winding, misty roads of the Appalachian Mountains, my friends and I decided to take a detour. We'd been hearing stories all day from locals about a nearly forgotten tunnel, one that had a dark history and was rumored to be haunted. It wasn't on any of the maps, but we were able to get rough directions from a gas station clerk who seemed both amused and concerned that we even wanted to find it. It was called the Tunnel of Whispers, and it sat off an old road that most people avoided. Curiosity got the best of us. We figured it would be a fun, creepy detour before heading back to our road trip. After a few wrong turns and a long stretch of road that seemed to lead to nowhere, we finally saw it, a small, barely noticeable tunnel carved into the mountainside. The entrance was overgrown, with faded graffiti and strange, weathered symbols scrawled along its walls. A chill ran down my spine as we drove closer, but none of us said a word. The air felt heavy, the kind of silence that presses down on you. As we entered the tunnel, the light from outside quickly disappeared, and the only thing cutting through the darkness was the dim glow of our car's headlights. It was longer than we expected, and soon our phone signals vanished. The GPS lost its signal too. We were completely cut off. Just us and the tunnel. That's when the car radio turned on by itself. At first it was static, harmless, right? But then, under the static, we began to hear it. Whispers. Soft, unintelligible, but undeniably there. My heart started racing. I turned the dial trying to switch it off, but it wouldn't stop. The whispers grew louder, and though I couldn't understand the words, I felt like they were calling to us, warning us. Then, out of nowhere, fog began to build on the windows. It didn't make sense. There was no reason for the car to fog up like that. But as I wiped at the glass, I saw them. Strange, unfamiliar symbols appearing in the condensation, almost as if someone, or something, was drawing them from the outside. We were all freaked out, but no one wanted to say it out loud. My friend in the back seat said he heard scratching. I didn't believe him at first, but then I heard it too. A faint, rhythmic scratching against the side of the car, like nails dragging across the metal. It started on the right side and slowly moved around the back, then to the left side. Whatever it was circling us. Panic set in. I floored the gas pedal, desperate to get out of that tunnel. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if something was clawing to get inside. My friends were shouting, telling me to drive faster. As soon as we burst out of the tunnel and back into the open air, everything stopped. The whispers, the scratching, even the strange fog on the windows. The radio clicked off on its own, and the silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. We didn't stop until we were miles away, finally pulling over at a gas station to catch our breath. It was there that we noticed it. The same symbols from the fog were etched into the car's paint, scratched deep into the metal. We stared at each other, horrified. The symbols weren't there before. Whatever was in that tunnel had followed us, marking its presence as if to say it wasn't done with us yet. None of us spoke the rest of the night, but we all knew the same thing. Something was with us in that tunnel, and part of it had come out with us. It was a long, hot night as my friends and I drove across rural Texas, the kind of place where the highways stretch on forever, and you can drive for miles without seeing another car. The sky was pitch black, dotted with stars, and the only light came from our car's headlights and the occasional flickering neon sign advertising long-abandoned motels. We were running low on gas, and with no other options in sight, we pulled into a remote, run-down gas station that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The place looked like it hadn't seen a proper customer in years. Peeling paint, dim lights, and a creaky old pump that looked like it could break down any second. We didn't have a choice, though. We needed gas, and we needed it fast. As we stepped inside the tiny shop, the bell above the door gave a shrill ring, and the guy behind the counter looked up from a dirty magazine. He was an older man, probably in his 50s, with greasy hair and a smile that made my skin crawl. There was something off about him, something unsettling. "Where y'all headed?" he asked, his eyes darting between us as if sizing us up. "Just passing through," I said, trying to keep it casual. I didn't want to give him any more information than necessary. "You got a place to stay for the night?" he asked, leaning forward a little too eagerly. His smile widened as if he already knew the answer. "Nah, we're fine," I lied, my instincts screaming at me to get out of there. The exchange grew more uncomfortable by the second. He kept prying, asking about our plans, where we were headed, where we might be stopping. My friends exchanged uneasy glances, and I felt my stomach twist into knots. Something wasn't right about this guy. After what felt like an eternity, we paid for the gas and bolted out of the shop, back to the safety of the car. We were relieved to be leaving that creepy place behind, but as we pulled out of the parking lot and back onto the highway, I noticed something in the rearview mirror, a beat-up old truck with its headlights off, parked just a little too close to the road. At first I brushed it off. We were probably just spooked from the weird encounter, but a few miles down the road the truck reappeared, this time with its headlights on. It followed us at a distance, and whenever we sped up or slowed down, it matched our pace. "Is that truck following us?" my friend asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know," I muttered, trying to sound calm, but my heart was racing. I pushed the gas pedal harder, hoping to put some distance between us and the truck. But no matter how fast I went, it stayed right behind us, its headlights glaring in the rearview mirror. We tried turning onto side roads, hoping to lose it in the darkness, but every time we thought we were in the clear, the truck would appear again, as if it knew exactly where we were going. It was like a nightmare playing out in real life. We drove for what felt like hours, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. Finally, just as the sun started to rise, the truck disappeared. We didn't know how, and we didn't care. Exhausted, we found a small diner to stop at and collect ourselves. Later that morning, while scrolling through my phone, I came across a news article that made my blood run cold. It mentioned a string of disappearances along the same highway we'd been driving on. Travelers had gone missing, and a few bodies had been found in nearby fields, not far from where we had stopped for gas the night before. The description of the suspects was vague, but one detail stood out: a beat-up old truck, last seen following the victims down the highway. We never stopped at a rural gas station again. It had been a long day of driving, and my friends and I were beyond exhausted when we saw the flickering neon sign for a roadside motel just outside a small, seemingly forgotten town. It was one of those places you'd pass without a second thought if you weren't desperate for a bed. But after hours on the road, we had no choice. The motel looked deserted as we pulled into the gravel parking lot. The building was old, weathered by years of neglect, with faded paint and a half-lit sign that barely read vacancy. We all hesitated, but there wasn't another option for miles. Inside the tiny office, we found an elderly man behind the counter. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken, and his smile was a little too wide. He seemed almost eager when we asked for a room. "Room 7, he said, sliding an old tarnished key across the counter with a grin that sent a chill down my spine. The walk to the room was unnervingly quiet. The place was dead. No other guests, no cars, just an eerie stillness. We laughed it off, convincing ourselves we were overthinking it, but something about the motel felt wrong, like it hadn't seen life in years. We unlocked the door to room 7, and the cold hit us immediately. The room was freezing, even though it was a warm night. It had the musty smell of a place left untouched for too long. The decor was outdated, like something straight out of the 70s, and the wallpaper was peeling. Still, we were too tired to care. We settled in, hoping for a few hours of sleep before getting back on the road. But sleep didn't come easily. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a sound. At first I thought it was just the wind outside, but then I heard it again, scratching. It was faint but persistent, like something clawing at the walls. I held my breath, listening intently, when suddenly I heard whispers, low, hushed voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I glanced at my friends. One of them stirred in his sleep, but the others seemed undisturbed. That's when I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. My skin prickled with unease, and every instinct told me something wasn't right. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling only grew stronger. Finally, I got up to investigate. I grabbed my phone, using the flashlight to scan the room, and that's when I noticed something strange. The dresser, which sat against the far wall, had scuff marks on the floor beneath it, as if it had been moved recently. Curiosity got the better of me, and I motioned for one of my friends to help me move it. Together, we slid the heavy dresser away from the wall, revealing a small, hidden door behind it, something that shouldn't have been there. My heart raced as we opened it, and what we found sent a chill down my spine. The small room behind the door was filled with old, yellowing photographs. They were pinned to the walls, scattered on the floor, everywhere. Each photo showed different people, families, couples, solo travelers, all smiling in front of the motel. But as I looked closer, a horrifying realization hit me. None of these people looked familiar. They were guests who had stayed here, just like us. But none of them had ever been seen again. My friend was already backing away, whispering, "We need to leave." Now. We didn't waste any time. We grabbed our things and bolted out of the room, throwing the keys onto the counter of the empty office as we ran to the car. As we sped away, I looked back one last time, and in the rearview mirror, I swore I saw the old man standing in the doorway, watching us leave with that same eerie grin. The next morning, still shaken by the events of the night before, I tried to find the motel online, just out of curiosity. But there was nothing. No listing, no reviews, no address. It was as if the motel and everything that happened there never existed at all. It was supposed to be a peaceful road trip through the Rockies, a chance for my friends and me to take in the stunning mountain views and disconnect from the world for a while. The drive had been smooth, the scenery breathtaking, until we encountered the RV. We first noticed it ahead of us, weaving erratically along the winding mountain road. At first, we thought the driver was just struggling with the sharp turns, but as we got closer, it became clear something was off. The RV swerved unpredictably, crossing the center line, barely staying on the road. We tried to pass it several times, but every time we moved closer, the RV would speed up, blocking our path. Frustration built as we followed it for miles. We honked, flashed our lights, but the RV kept swaying dangerously, refusing to let us pass. It was unnerving, almost as if the driver was playing a game with us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we spotted a rest stop ahead and decided to pull over, hoping the RV would move on without us. But as we pulled into the gravel lot, there it was. The same old RV parked at the far end of the rest stop, its windows coated in a thick layer of grime. It was unsettling to see it there, especially considering we hadn't seen it turn off the road. The eerie silence of the mountains surrounded us as we cautiously approached the vehicle, wondering if the driver might need help. I knocked on the door, but there was no response. We called out, asking if everything was okay, but the only answer was the faint whistle of the wind. The RV felt abandoned, lifeless. My friends urged me to leave, but something made me hesitate. There was something unsettling about the whole situation, something that made my skin crawl. As we turned to leave, an older man, a local from the nearby village, approached us. He must have noticed us eyeing the RV because he gave us a strange look and said, "You shouldn't be messing with that." Confused, I asked him what he meant. That's when he told us the story. He explained that years ago a family had been driving that very RV through the Rockies. It was supposed to be a summer vacation, a road trip to see the mountains. But something went wrong. The RV had gone off the road, crashing into the mountainside. The authorities searched for the wreckage and found the RV, but no sign of the family inside. No bodies, nothing. They say it still roams these roads, the man continued, his voice low and grim. Some folks have seen it, just like you. It drives like it's real, but no one's behind the wheel. The family was never found. A chill ran down my spine as I glanced back at the RV. The windows were still dark, the grime obscuring any view inside, but now the whole thing felt wrong. Like we were standing too close to something we weren't supposed to see. We didn't need any more convincing. Without another word, we hurried back to the car and drove away, not daring to look back at the RV. For the rest of the trip, the feeling of unease stayed with us. Every time we passed a rest stop or saw an old vehicle in the distance, my heart would skip a beat. The Rockies, once beautiful and serene, now felt full of secrets. Dark, haunting secrets. To this day, I can't shake the memory of that RV. I wonder if it's still out there, roaming the mountain roads, searching for something or someone that it will never find.